What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and I want to talk to you about a graphic novel that I finished reading today, Essential Captain America Volume 1. This book is a little rough around the edges, but it works fine as a reading copy, and that's all that I really cared about. It doesn't have to look like it's brand new. This book collects issues of Tales of Suspense, 59 through 99. That sounds like a lot of comics, but it's not. This book is actually pretty thin for an essential book. Tales of Suspense at the time, half of each issue was an Iron Man story, and the other half of each issue was a Captain America story. Then, after issue 99, Iron Man gets booted off the comic. I don't know if he got his own self-titled Iron Man series, or if he went on to co-star in Tales to Astonish. I'm not really sure, but after that point, Iron Man stops starring in Tales of Suspense, and then with issue 100, Captain America becomes the main star of this comic, and the title is changed to Captain America. So we've got 59 through 99 of Tales of Suspense, and then Captain America 100 through 102, and then a very short, like 5-page comic from the 1940s from, I think, Captain America Comics issue 10. This book, I was surprised at how much that I enjoyed this story. When you read comics from the 1960s, specifically when you read Marvel comics from the 1960s, you might have something that's really good. For example, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby on Fantastic Four was a really good series. It took it a little while to really get excellent, but even from the beginning, it was pretty good even in the early issues. And then Stan Lee and Steve Ditko on Spider-Man, a really excellent run of comics. And Spider-Man didn't stop being good when Steve Ditko left the book and he was replaced by, I think, John Romita Sr. The book continued to be really awesome even after that. But then you've got other series from the 1960s, like Daredevil or the X-Men. Those books were not nearly as good as Fantastic Four or Spider-Man. And so when you sample something from the Silver Age of Marvel Comics, you're kind of going with a 50-50 chance that it might be good or it might be really bad. And I was surprised to see that this Captain America book was pretty good. I'm not going to say it's as amazing as Spider-Man or Fantastic Four from that time period, but it's definitely a lot closer to those two than it is Daredevil or X-Men. I was very surprised by how much I enjoyed this. Basically, you've got, I think, 2 issues set in the present day, which is after the Avengers have rescued Captain America from suspended animation, and he has been reintroduced to the world. He has a couple of fun one-off adventures, and then we get to see a reinterpretation of his origin story, and then after that, we get about 10 or so issues that cover some of his adventures in World War II. And then after that, we get a little caption in one of those issues that say, hey, some of our fans are curious to see what Captain America is up to in the present day. So from now on, we're going to have him in the present day. And it feels a lot like they weren't really sure what to do with Captain America. I have said before that Captain America is a character who works very well in the 1940s as a symbol of hope and kind of a figurehead for all of the Allied powers and all of the superheroes who were active in the 1940s. He works very well in that period as an icon fighting against the forces of evil, and also as a tragic character who we find out much later dies or seemingly dies fighting the forces of evil. But then when you bring him forward into the present day, I've always said that he's very limited in what you can do with him. You can have him be part of the Avengers, where he's a supporting character, but when you have him in his own solo story set in the present day, it's very hard to make that work because he doesn't really have a secret identity like, say, Superman, who, when he's not being Superman, he's working at the Daily Planet. And you've got different forms of conflict that he can participate as Clark Kent in the Daily Planet. Steve Rogers, Captain America, doesn't really have that in this book. He occasionally works with agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., like Nick Fury and Agent 13, who I will talk about later, but he doesn't really have a supporting cast to bounce stories off of and to participate in other stories when he's not punching the Red Skull or Baron Zemo in the face. And so I've always said that I felt like Captain America was a little bit of a limited character, that you can't do as much stuff with him when you unfreeze him from suspended animation and have him doing stuff in the present day. You can have him be an Avenger where he's a supporting character, but it's a lot harder to have him be his own solo act in his own comic book. And this book definitely feels like it's trying to struggle with that. It's trying to figure out what it wants to do with him. I still enjoyed this book, but it is very clear to me anyway that this book is struggling with what should we do with Captain America now that he's no longer fighting in World War II. Should he have a secret identity? At one point, Steve Rogers decides, okay, since this girl that I'm in love with, and she's in love with me, but she won't quit her job at S.H.I.E.L.D., I'm just going to reveal to the world that I'm Captain America, and I'm going to stop being Captain America. And he just kind of does that without really thinking about the consequences, and then he decides to go back to being Captain America, not a Captain America, and then from that point forward, I guess everyone in the world knows his secret identity, but he wasn't really using his secret identity, so that's something that I guess Stan Lee and Jack Kirby figured, hey, wait a minute, unlike, say, Superman or Batman or Spider-Man even, or other characters at Marvel who are keeping their identities a secret for very good reasons, Captain America, all his friends and family have been dead for a really long time, so there's really no reason for him to keep that a secret. So it kind of felt to me like they were trying to, it took them a while to get on their feet. Also, this book, like 80% of the stories here are Red Skull stories, and the Red Skull works fine as an arch nemesis for Captain America, but after a while, when most of these stories are Red Skull stories, you kind of get tired of him, at least I did. After a while, I kind of wanted to see other characters like Arnim Zola or Baron Zemo or MODOK. We get a few other Captain America rogues in this story, but they don't get nearly as much screen time as the Red Skull. Batroc the Leaper, he shows up, I think, 3 times here, and he's kind of the villain with honor. He has a code of ethics that he follows even though he's a bad guy. I can kind of sort of see why people like him, although honestly, for me, he is to this series what the Stiltman is to Daredevil. I don't really care about Batroc the Leaper or Batroc the Leaper, so if he died today, that wouldn't bother me at all. I can kind of see why people like him, unlike Stiltman, who I cannot understand why people like that character. I can kind of see why people like Batroc, but he doesn't really do anything for me. MODOK shows up in, I think, 2 issues in this book, but in one of them, he's only behind the scenes and you don't actually get to see him. And I like MODOK. I think he's awesome, both as a hilarious character and also as a serious character. I think he works. I wish we got a whole lot more MODOK here than what we got. We don't hardly get any of that at all. We get like 2 Baron Zemo stories, and in one of those stories, it's not even Baron Zemo. Spoiler, it's some dude who worked for Baron Zemo in the war. And then you find out late in this book that Baron Zemo had been fighting the Avengers a little bit and was presumed dead because of something that happened to him in the Avengers series. So if you want to see Baron Zemo stories, go read Essential Avengers Volume 1 or Volume 2. So we don't really get a whole lot of Captain America enemies here. Basically, it's AIM, which is just a faceless organization, or the Red Skull, or a whole bunch of Nazis if you're reading the stuff that's set during World War II. And personally, I would have liked to have seen more of a wide variety of villains here. If you're reading, say, Essential X-Men Volume 1, like I said, Silver Age X-Men is not very good, but at least you got a wide variety of villains for the X-Men to fight. Just in the first 20 or so issues of X-Men, you got the Juggernaut, you got the Blob, you got Eunice the Untouchable, you got all of the Brotherhood of Mutants, you got the Submariner for one issue, you got a whole bunch of characters to fight the X-Men. Here, you only get about 4 of Captain America's villains who are known today, and a few of them don't even get that much to do. So I really do wish that we could have had less Red Skull and more of some of these other characters. Also, during one of the issues that is set in the 1940s, we have Captain America and Bucky. They meet this female agent, and they keep making a big deal about she's a female agent who's working to fight the Nazis. And you can tell this was written in the 1960s because of how much emphasis they're putting on it's a woman who's also fighting crime, and she's not staying behind a desk like a woman should do. But anyway, she is Agent 13, and this is set in the 1940s. And we get a couple of issues with her. We never find out her name, but I've looked this up, I've Googled it. Apparently, Agent 13 is Peggy Carter, which is what I thought. I was pretty sure it was Peggy Carter. And then we find out in one story that Captain America and Peggy Carter were actually in love, and then they planned to, after the war, settle down and get married. And then there was one more adventure that they both had to go on, and somehow this bomb landed somewhere, and it gave her amnesia. So she never met up with him at the rendezvous point that they had planned. So Captain America, 20 years later, he's thinking that she's out there somewhere, or that maybe she died, and he never did find out for sure what happened to her. But we never actually find out what happened to her after she got amnesia. But then you've got this other Agent 13 in the present day, and that's Sharon Carter. Now, I don't really know the difference between between Sharon and Peggy. Here, these two characters are virtually interchangeable. Neither one of them have much of a personality beyond being the woman of this comic, and that is a big problem with comics in the 1960s from Marvel, where characters like Betty Ross or Mary Jane or Jean Grey or Sue Storm or Peggy or Sharon Carter, none of those characters really had much of a personality of their own. They were just kind of the token girl. I mentioned Mary Jane, but she's actually, all of the women in the Spider-Man comic were kind of the exception to the rule. Because there were multiple girls in the Spider-Man comic, I feel like the creators there felt more of a need to try and differentiate those women, so they would try to make Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane and Liz Allen and Betty Brant a little bit different from each other. But any other woman in the Marvel Universe, like Sue Storm or Jean Grey or Peggy or Sharon Carter, really didn't have much of a personality beyond being in love with one of the men of that comic. And Peggy and Sharon, they're not really much different from each other, except that one of them existed in World War II, the other one existed in the 1960s as an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. And we find out that Sharon is actually the younger sister of Peggy, and there's this ongoing thread in this book that's really stupid, where she and Captain America keep proclaiming that they are in love with each other, but multiple times they keep saying stuff like, isn't it weird that we're in love with each other, but you've never seen my real face and I don't know your real name? And I keep thinking, okay, take off your mask. Show her your real face. Tell him your real name. And eventually he does take off his mask. It's after he's revealed to the world that he is Steve Rogers, or maybe it's right before he does that, I'm not sure, but eventually he does take off his mask and reveal to her his real face. And it's weird because in her first appearance, in Sharon's first appearance, she was actually saying to herself, he kind of looks like this guy that I knew back in the 1940s who dated my older sister. She says something to that effect. She's saying, but nah, that can't be him. Well, then later, whenever he reveals himself to actually be Steve Rogers, you would think she'd be saying, hey, listen, do you ever know what happened to my sister? She disappeared in the middle of the war. And then he'd be like, oh, wait, you're Peggy's sister. Oh, no, I don't know what happened to Peggy. Let's go find her together. You'd think that something like that would happen. But anyway, eventually he takes off his mask, but then she refuses to tell him her real name. Multiple times he keeps talking about how he's in love with Agent 13, except that he knows nothing about her. That is a huge pet peeve in this book, where he keeps talking about how this is the only woman that he's ever loved, even though we've already seen flashbacks where he was in love with Peggy, so that's a little bit weird, but he keeps talking about how she's the only woman for him, but he doesn't know jack about her. He doesn't know her favorite color, her favorite restaurant, if she likes horses or cats or dogs or anything like that. He doesn't know her real name, first, last, or middle. He doesn't know anything about her except that she works for S.H.I.E.L.D. and she is Agent 13. And I really do feel like that's another big problem in the 1960s comics, where you have these two characters and suddenly they're in love, but the comic doesn't actually try to work for it. Today, you would have them really focus a lot more on that. And even nowadays, I mean, I remember one of my pet peeves with the Amazing Spider-Man movie was that Gwen and Peter are just suddenly together. I really liked them as a couple, but we didn't get to see them really develop their relationship. We didn't get to see that relationship grow throughout the course of the movie, partly because the movie was limited by a 2-hour-ish screen time. But here, in an ongoing series, you're really not limited. You could take 30 or 40 issues to let these characters slowly get to know each other and slowly fall in love with each other. They didn't do that here. They just have these two characters, they meet each other, and then I guess they fall in love with each other based solely on looks. I'm not really sure. I know it sounds like I did not enjoy this book, but I really, really did. I enjoyed this a lot more than I did the Silver Age X-Men stuff or the Silver Age Daredevil stuff. I think it's really punchy, really fast-paced stuff. You could probably finish this in about a week if you really put your mind to it, and I think part of that is because about 99% of this book is half issues that are only about 10 pages long instead of a full 20-ish page comic book. So it doesn't waste any of that time with Captain America going around saying, woe is me, Bucky is dead, Peggy's nowhere to be found, Sharon Carter won't let me marry her. He doesn't go around spending a lot of time doing that because it only has 10 pages to get to the story. So pretty quickly, it will just jump right into the story. And so this is some of the most action-packed stuff from the 1960s that I can immediately think of, and I really like that. I really like that this doesn't waste a lot of time on stuff that, frankly, I don't care about, like Captain America whining about Agent 13 not wanting to marry him or not telling him her real name or stuff like that. It's a lot of really fun, high-suspense, high-octane superhero adventure stuff, and I really love it. If you like Jack Kirby's art, you're really going to like this. It's not as madness, head tripping all over the place stuff like you would see in some of his later stuff, but it's pretty out there stuff anyway. If you like Jack Kirby's weird technology stuff that he draws, you get quite a bit of that here. For example, MODOK. Also, Stan Lee, he does an okay job here. He's not as on point as he is on books like, say, Spider-Man, where I feel like he was really at his peak in the 1960s. But it's still a pretty fun and enjoyable book. It made me interested enough to want to check out Volume 2. And that's saying quite a bit, since I'm not the world's biggest Captain America fan anyway, but I really did enjoy this book, and I am wanting to read more stuff that comes after this. So those are my thoughts on Essential Captain America Volume 1. I hope that you guys liked this review, and I hope maybe I was able to convince you guys to check out this book. In the meantime, I will see you guys later in the week with some other videos. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.